All right, so today we are going to talk about Marvel. But before we do, I need to explain a couple of things. Now, if you've engaged with my other discussions like IDW comic books, then this is going to be different. This is Q1 2018, but you notice that this is for Disney. That's because Marvel Entertainment is an affiliate of the Disney Corporation. Imagine the mouse out there dangling its fingers out with, a little bit of puppeteering string. Underneath are all the little companies that do the dance for the mouse. Those there, they include Marvel Entertainment. Now, off of that, you have a lot of things included within Marvel Entertainment, including movies, print, and what have you. You are not going to get an itemized breakdown. Instead, you're going to see certain things that are trends, and moreover, within that discussion, you have to look at other factors, which we'll talk about in just a second. But within that, you have to look at what's been successful too. I think something that's very alarming within Marvel right now is the success of Black Panther. Not because it was good or bad as a movie, but rather how it was marketed. And really, when you think about movie tie-ins, when you see this kick for fresh start, when we're talking about trying to develop a comic book that actually segues off of that, what do you think the lesson was that Marvel took from this? They basically managed to take a summer blockbuster that would have appealed to a smaller demographic, and they made it an identity politics soapbox wherein the advertisement for it itself, it caused them to quadruple or more their earnings. They saw earnings go through the roof. So what do you think they would do with that? Remember too, within the print industry, when you look at the earnings for Black Panther, when you compare that to the print industry there, the earnings actually, they well eclipse all of the money that Marvel will probably make, not only within this year as far as print, but probably a year and a half to 2 years. I mean, that's how lucrative this stuff is. So when you're talking about tie-ins, you have to remember that sort of thing, and you have to remember industry. You have to remember the language they speak. If that were your company, you had a success like that was that large, what would you do? Of course, you would rinse and repeat. You would do the same thing. And that's what companies do too. They leave that almost on autopilot. They're going to keep the same mechanism in place until that mechanism fails. And especially with a Disney will let the proverbial wheels fall off of something before they actually change it up, as is the case with, say, a Star Wars. You can see how they've approached that. Now, within this, too, something else to look at, you're talking to shareholders here. We're speaking the language of money, and the people that are actually buying into this, they are shareholders. They have vested interest in this because it's their money. They are the people that Disney wants to placate. The rest of us, we're consumers. They worry about the bottom line. They worry about us impacting, say, their merchandising and whatnot. But as a consumer, they could care less in a lot of ways. They're that big. They don't have to think about that day-to-day drip down topic. Within that, EPS, which is earnings per share, how much you see as a dividend there, you're going to see an increase here that has nothing to do with Disney. Quite contrary, in fact. You hear about all of this rhetoric coming out of, Marvel, and you come out of Disney employees. Well, Trump, his tax cuts, they are what are driving the earnings per share here. Disney even says that. CBS, ABC, they all have said the same thing. You're seeing an increase in that because of tax. You're paying a much lower corporate tax here, and that break, it's passed on to the stockholder as well as the company itself. So that's something, within this that will keep the mechanism running exactly the same way it's going. But anyhow, I wanted to do that, tell you a little bit at the front before we get into this, because it'll explain the approach somewhat. Now, when looking at the topic here, this is the immediate release, so you can see that this has been out a little while. I've been thinking about how I wanted to approach it, and actually didn't know if I wanted to approach this at all, because it is complicated in its own way, but again, we don't get a narrow enough picture sometimes. So when looking at this, you can see that they're talking about the quarterly earnings, and they talk about the diluted earnings per share, or EPS, for the quarter increasing 88% there, because they say, excluding a $1.6 billion one-time net tax benefit associated with new U.S. federal income tax regulation, or the Tax Act, and certain other items affecting comparability, EPS for the quarter increased 22% in the prior year quarter. So you can see, if they actually exclude that, they still had an EPS earning. But when you look at the earnings per share, because of that, people saw an 88% return. People are going to be happy anyway with a 22% return, but you can explain that off more easily by looking at parks and resorts, because they made a lot of money this time versus, say, 88%, which makes it sound like everything's going right. So that's what this page is, though. It's looking at that. You can see the earnings increase. You see the change, 88% and whatnot. And you see the free cash flow and everything. You can see how that's increased. And they explain, the exclusion and whatnot. I'm going to put a link to this too, so you can look through it as well. But then you can look at the different breakdowns. When you're looking at revenues, you look at media networks. You actually have, stagnation here. Nothing changing. Parks and resorts, that's where your money's coming in. They are making bank there. You are looking at numbers in the millions. So, consider that. These are in the millions. So you're talking about heavy numbers. When you're talking about things in the billions of dollars and you're seeing a 13% increase, think about the monolith that we're talking about here, and then think about them engaging something that only makes $180 million before all of the expense comes out of it. That's not something that they see as priority. They use that as a mechanism for driving something forward. But you can look at studio entertainment, for example. That's where some of our stuff falls. They actually saw a drop. They saw a loss of 1%. That's pretty stagnant considering what came out with it and whatnot. You'll hear a lot of talk and rhetoric about certain things like Star Wars, but then look at consumer products and interactive media, and looking at studio entertainment, you actually see a loss. You actually see something going down there. Now, as far as segment operating income, and all of this stuff will be broken down later within this, but you can see how money loss you have. Really, I hate to call it loss. You're talking year to year in changes, but you can see the decline in that. The only thing that's really a heavy money maker, no matter what, are parks and resorts. The other stuff, it makes money, but when you're looking at it as overall, there are a lot of different variables in play. Looking at, say, media networks, where it's broken down here, for example, they talk about cable networks, for example, and how you had declines because of like BAMTech and ESPN, but how that was offset by things like Freeform and the Disney Channel. Now, you get a good breakdown for that, and the importance of all of that, the reason you should look through it, and understand it, is again because you can see how this company approaches these things, what's important to them, what is harmed within that. That way you understand how to talk to them if you want to lodge a complaint. When you're talking about, say, a Star Wars, for example, they could care less about what you think about that movie. But when you're talking about their advertising deals and you're talking about their merchandising, they're afraid people will be driven away. They put in things that is Disney. They put in this bigger thing, this identitarian portion they always have within their products. That is part of Disney. But, at the end of the day, too, they need to make not only money, but money that offsets other losses. They need to increase revenue. They need to see that EPS driven. And that EPS is going to be driven year long now, because we saw those results from the tax cuts, but also parks and resorts. They camouflage things. Last year we actually saw a decline in EPS. This year it looks like something's going right. So hopefully some of that, it actually casts a shadow on something that you want to transpire. But good luck with that, with things like, again, Black Panther movie and the marketing there. Make no mistake, I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the reality that they see versus the reality of a movie. So looking at broadcasting, you can see the results here. I'm not covering all of this stuff like parks and resorts because really it doesn't go to the larger conversation for me. I don't want to go through it all too because really what does it matter, how much money they make at a park and resort when we're talking about comic books, except to understand their mindset. But when we get to studio entertainment, you can see how the numbers were relatively flat, and they describe why that was. They talk about, they made more money with theatrical distribution, but that's offset by decreases in the home entertainment, TV, SVOD distribution, as well as lower income for consumer products and interactive media segment revenue sharing. Now, they talk about the increase being due to the reflected success of Star Wars The Last Jedi and Thor Ragnarok. And make no mistake, they see The Last Jedi as a success. I know people will tell you time and again that it wasn't, and it failed on many levels. It failed as far as merchandising, it failed as far as consumers being driven away, but as far as money, they made their money. They made $1.32 billion plus when you add in all of the different things, the differential income coming in. That is a resounding success for them. So they talk about, compared to Rogue One, Star Wars story. So they see Rogue One as something of a disappointment versus the Star Wars Last Jedi because, again, they look at something within principle, and this is part of spin as well, and Doctor Strange in the prior year quarter. Other significant releases in the current quarter include Coco, while the prior year quarter included Moana. Now, something they talk about too when they're talking about the news release for this, I may or may not cover that. I'm not sure. It depends on how long this is. You can look that up though. They talk about how they're looking forward to Black Panther, and they saw a lot of money. So I really think that that's going to change up how they move. The decrease in home entertainment results was driven by lower unit sales, reflecting the performance of Car 3 and compared to, say, Finding Dory. So you can see what they're looking at there. Lower TV, SVOD. You can see the prior year it included Captain America Civil War and Jungle Book, while current year included Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So they're going to try to learn things about those movies. They will take lessons from each one that they notice there because they see those as money makers versus, the dog out there, the one that did not make money. Why did it not make money? How can we continue to incorporate that with certain characters? How can we bring in more people? And how can we put the Disney touch on it? Now, consumer products and interactive media, you can see the decrease 2%. They talk about the lower operating income was due to decreases at our merchandise licensing and our retail business, partially offset by an increase at our games business. So they go through the decrease, and it's kind of interesting to look at this too. The decrease at merchandise licensing was due to unfavorable timing of minimal guarantee shortfall recognition. That's a lot to say right there. And lower licensing revenue for merchandise based off of Frozen and Finding Nemo Dory, partially offset by increases for merchandise based on Cars and Star Wars. Star Wars licensing revenue included the recognition of revenue from merchandise based on the Star Wars The Last Jedi that was deferred in the fourth quarter of fiscal 2017. Minimum guarantee shortfalls are generally recognized at the end of the contract period. For contracts that ended on December 31st, minimum guarantee shortfalls were recognized in the prior year first quarter compared to the second quarter of the current year. So you can see how they will actually line up the losses that they have. So it really camouflages the losses with revenue for certain toys or the benefits for them. Right now, again, they see Star Wars as a way to print money. Regardless of everything everyone says about Star Wars doing this or that, currently they think that they have something that's working for them. They're just going to keep tweaking it, and they're going to make changes. so they can get the right buzz out there. And again, if they take a lesson from Black Panther, you saw how that worked out for them. So who knows what we might actually see with a Star Wars licensure there. Lower results, continuing here, lower results at our retail business were due to unfavorable foreign currency impact. The increase at our games business was due to licensing revenue from Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was released in the current quarter, whereas there was no comparable release in the prior year quarter. So, I mean, literally, they had an increase because there was nothing to compare it to. Now, when you go through and you look at other expenses that are thrown out there, they have income tax, non-controlled interest, cash flows, capital expenditure, and so on. They have all of this spelled out there. I'm going to put this into the comments section so you can look through it. So I think that'll actually, again, give you an idea of how this stuff works, and you can look through it on your own, instead of breaking it down, or you can just go through what we talked about. Really, we covered the big things, but again, there is more here. There's more to understanding all of that. There's also some complaint numbers, although there are better complaint numbers than calling these. If you go through there, I want to mention that. When we're looking at the consolidated statement of income, you can see how that's broken down as well, just so you can see how, costs are actually broken down, and it's kind of interesting to compare them year to year. We've talked about equity in other videos about how common stock versus preferred stock works. Basically that's how much of a voice you have and whether it was traded openly or privately, and so on. I mean, all of this stuff is here. It's like I said, it's kind of interesting, and it brings you a bigger portion of the puzzle. It shows you what to look at. All right, so on top of that, I want to showcase what I've been talking about with the Black Panther, and I want to show you a few other things. This is an earnings conference call transcript, so you're actually getting the people that are in charge talking about these different things. This is aligned with what we just saw. They're explaining everything that transpired there. Look here, when we start with turning to our studios, we're just days away from the highly anticipated release of Black Panther, which opens on February 16th, and the buzz is palpable. At the moment, ticket pre-sales are outpacing every other superhero movie ever made, driven in part by the phenomenal reaction to the premiere last week. Marvel continues to defy expectation and redefine the superhero genre in each new release, constantly raising the bar with stories and characters that are fresh, compelling, and spectacular. Black Panther is a great example, and we're thrilled with the attention and accolades it's received. It's exciting to see such tremendous enthusiasm for the film and its brilliant, diverse cast. So there's certain words within there that you can see with the accolades and the diverse cast and whatnot. When they throw things out there like that and they're going to see the return that they do, you better bet that they're going to continue with that. They also talk about what they expect next, their movies that they're going to see. So this is a forward-looking conference when they're talking about this stuff, but they also talk about the year itself. They talk about how certain things did within that, where the money comes from, what you should expect when you're going forward, and so on. Now you can see when they're talking about their theatrical releases, this is the point that I'm trying to make to people too. People want to see Star Wars through the lens that they're seeing with other individuals, or they want to see it as a disappointment in specific markets, but you have to look at this thing not only in its spin, but how much money it relates. Looking here, for example, our theatrical business had another solid quarter due to strong performances with Star Wars Last Jedi, Thor Ragnarok, and Coco. You look at the third Star Wars film here, and through today, these three films have collectively generated over $4.4 billion in global box office. Again, they are going to ride this direction until the wheels fall off because they've made that much revenue. I mean, that is astounding when you think about what they invested. And then, when they invested X amount to buy it, then they invest X amount to actually make this manifest. And look at the profits that they've received already off of it. And that doesn't count any of the other licensure stuff with it. So, of course, they're not hurting on that front. They don't care if they destroy Star Wars for people as long as they make their money, because that's how companies work. And we continue on down the road from this. But I wanted to show you this portion because this actually makes the point that I'm talking about. And this smacks in the face of what some other people will tell you. You know, they tell you changes are coming. Changes are coming, and I want that to be true, but when you look at the hard numbers with stuff, certain things, again, like Star Wars, I don't really think that's going to transpire unless they're trying to pull up ratings and boost it, and then what approach will they take? All right, so a last factor within this, one I'm not going to figure up because we have exhausted this conversation as far as Comic-Con, but one thing that you can look at this quarter and relate it to Comic-Con, because remember again, those are diamond numbers. Basically, you have Comic-Con taking composite those numbers, and a lot of their information, they just bring it straight over, and then they add on, or they composite the totals for what something is going to cost. They take that unit and they figure out the math to it. And that's not counting any kind of expense that comes out of it either. That's just really talking about direct sales. And remember, this is direct sales. Also, remember within Marvel, the reason I pulled up this specific date is because Marvel, the fiscal year for Disney, it ends in September, or it ends at September. So you're talking about October being new. So we know what this conversation looks like. We've seen it. We also know what transpired there. We know that Legacy was rolled out. We know the problems with lenticular covers. We know how they compare year to year and so on. We also know the equation as a marketplace as a whole. We know when we look at that, we look at it for a year, we see a downturn from $580 million to $522 million. So even when we see equations that go up as far as percentage within the marketplace, percentage of dollars, you have problems because there's less to go around. You can look at that stuff very easily. You just scroll down through here, look at overall sales, you get you a number here, then you go down, you can see how many units are sold if you're so inclined, but then you can see share of overall dollars. You can compare that number to the number before after you figure it up. And the number there from October to October, it actually does change up. You see an increase for Marvel actually in the shares because, again, we have Legacy kicking up, but comparing it to the year previously, it's nothing. When you get down to that, it's still down because you're talking about a marketplace that had one heck of a bad year as far as the print portion were concerned. But still, that does not really factor into what Disney is talking about. They don't even seem to really care about this portion of the industry. They care to a point, again, as a vehicle or a driver for some type of catalyst. If they want something, they want to spark some kind of a movie, excitement, or buzz, I could see them definitely using this. And again, with that conversation we just had, it's kind of a scary thing when you get down to some of it because you see what push forward. That's why when you look at the changes with things like Fresh Start, the fresh set of paint, you're still not looking at a lot of real changes. You're not truly seeing something that's going to wow audiences there because we saw success at the end of the day with one part of that formula. We're going to see success with Black Panther. If it translates or it doesn't, it's still, it's continuing that source material. And, Marvel, again, going with that Disney idea, they're saying that they're underpaid there. People are making under $30,000 in New York, according to Glassdoor. You're talking about something that has problems. They're actually seen as an outside portion of Disney. They're not treated like they're part of the club, as it were. If you want to read through those reviews, they're very interesting. Did a review on that. I thought that video was pretty interesting. I'm going to go back to it again. But anyway, it comes together and it paints a picture. And the picture, for me, I don't see it as a picture that, I don't see it as change. I see it as more of the same. I see it as a frightening thing. Now, perhaps something will succeed within the year. Perhaps the industry will actually look at itself in the mirror and, Marvel, they would actually see how they could succeed. I'm just afraid that they do not have that type of awareness, or they don't want to have that type of awareness. We have seen certain things happen on a smaller scale. We've given them credit, like something is transpiring, something is changing, but really, is there anything changing? When you see people walk out the door, for example, like I saw people talking about Heather Antos leaving. They were saying, Heather Antos, that's a sign that things are changing. Is it? She went and got another job. We don't really know what truly caused that. When we see Erica Henderson leaving a project, that may not mean anything. We always have transition within this. And when you see the upper heads, if you cut through what they're saying there, they're not saying a lot at all, and that is particularly bothersome. So anyhow, I know I've talked for a little while on this, but I thought it was interesting, so thank you.